Rád bych mezi námi srdečně přivítal paní doktorku Anna Tropia. Nebudu její jméno skloňovat, protože je to jméno italské. Paní doktorka se narodila v Espoletu v Umbrii v Itálii. Filozofii studovala v Pize a v Paříži a je pro nás, myslím, tady naší malé velké české kotlině velkou ctí, že od roku 2018 začala působit na Filozofické fakultě Univerzity Karlovy, kde dále působí jako odborná asistentka pro odbor středověká filozofie. Její prezentace bude v angličtině, o co nás paní doktorka požádala. My, protože jsme velcí akademici, tak tomu samozřejmě budeme nějak aspoň základně rozumět a bude se věnovat otázce definice lidské duše, jakým způsobem je toto téma pojato u svatého Tomáše Akvinského a jak se potom vyskytuje v pozdější teologii, především v teologii jezuitské. So be very welcome, Dr. Anna Tropia, and you can start your conference. We will hear with attention.
Thank you very much for this presentation. Thank you for the invitation as well. I am very sorry because I'm going to speak English, so I will try to speak slowly so that I am easy to follow. And no worries, I'm the last one of the day. I know what this means. Namely, I'm going to be short. So, I've noticed as I was sitting in the public before that it's not very easy to read the PowerPoint. So as I have all my text on the PowerPoints, I will try not to read them at all, and I will try just to comment on them so that you don't have to struggle reading what is written on it. So let us start indeed. So the project of today is, as you can imagine, evidently not that of talking about the relation of the reappraisal among some contemporary thinkers of Thomas Aquinas, nor of any parts of his thought. I am going to talk about a strange kind of souchasnost of contemporary thought, namely the thought of a Jesuit in the 16th century, which is nevertheless my contemporary. It is contemporary to me because I'm working all the time on Jesuits of the 16th century. But it is a case of reappraisal and a case which concerns what? The study of the soul, and most likely, and most particularly, the definition of the soul as it was conceived of by Aquinas. Namely, by Aristotle as well, right? Because the idea of the soul as what informs, organizes, structures the human body is the definition, one of the definitions provided by Aristotle in On the Soul, in his treatise On the Soul. So our starting point today will be Aquinas' definition on the soul as anima forma corporis, but our case in point, our case study will be a text by a Jesuit of the 16th century, Juan Maldonado. I'm not shocked if you have never read about him, why should you? This text is called De Origine, Natura et Immortalitate Animae, and it was the first lecture, the opening inaugural lecture of the Jesuit College of Paris in 1564. And then our arrival point will be that of understanding what Maldonado does, how he unpacks, so to say, Aquinas' definition of the soul. So you could ask yourself the question, why am I talking about a perfect stranger, an obscure Jesuit, Juan Maldonado? Well, in his day, he was not a perfect stranger. He is one of the first Jesuits teaching philosophy and theology in Paris, but overall after the foundation of the Society of Jesus. And he was extremely influential. We find traces of his thought even in the most famous Jesuits, those that usually come to mind when you think about Jesuits in the 16th century, such as Francisco Suarez, Rodrigo de Arriaga, and others. So let us see what Maldonado does, how he reworks with Aquinas. I hope you can see the image because this is the only image of my PowerPoint, basically. All the others are text. This is the first folio with the title of this text, De Origine, Natura et Immortalitate Animae. Why you have never heard about this text? Because it has arrived to us only in a manuscript, in manuscript forms. There is a lot of culture belonging to this first pioneeristic period of culture production by the Jesuits, which has come down to us and is still preserved only in manuscript form. This doesn't mean that these texts were not influential or that they are not important. It is the case of this text, De Origine, Natura et Immortalitate Animae, to which I attach a lot of importance. I edited, so in case you are curious, you can actually read it. It's accessible. It was published in 2021 in the Recherche de Théologie et Philosophie. I have done the edition of the text of the two manuscripts. And as I said already, this is the first course. This is what is extant of the first course of philosophy taught in Paris by Juan Maldonado. Juan Maldonado is called to inaugurate the chair of philosophy in Paris in 1564. What he does is commenting on the anima by Aristotle, as it was the program, right, at the university. This course today is lost. What has come down to us is only this synthesis, this text, which I refer to in the PowerPoint as Donia, De Origine, Natura et Immortalitate Animae, on the origin, nature, and soul's immortality. It's a synthesis that Maldonado wrote down after commenting on the anima. We don't know exactly why he did that. I have found in a text published later by a student of him that it was because of the success of this course and because students wanted to know more about it. But I also think that there are other reasons. I will talk about them later. So that is our text, the text I'm going to talk about. So what does Maldonado say about the soul? You don't have to follow this super long text. I mean, I was sitting there before and I experienced that it was impossible to read on the PowerPoint. Maldonado actually starts defining the origin of the soul, right? And then he talks about the nature of the soul, and then he concludes the arrival point of this short tract is the soul's immortality, which he aims to defend within the limits of soul reason, namely as a philosopher and not as a theologian. Of course, this doesn't mean that he was no theologian. But he begins very calmly by examining the definition, the standard definition by Aristotle in On the Soul. So what does it mean? He asks the question as to whether the soul, according to Aristotle, is the form of the body. What does this mean? And what kind of soul is Maldonado interested in? It becomes very evident quickly that he aims to understand the nature of one particular soul, the rational soul, the human soul, because the overall goal of this tract is that of defending the soul's immortality within the limits of soul reason. Why is that? A spoiler, I tell you why immediately. Because Maldonado was very much willing to obey to the dictamina, to the rules, to the regulations of the most famous papal bull of the 16th century, the Apostolici Regiminis. So, according to which the Pope was prescribing teachers to teach philosophical truths together with theological truths, and as truth does not contradict truth, the two things can go hand in hand. So it is perfectly possible to prove philosophically the soul's immortality. And Maldonado, this is Maldonado's agenda, talking about these things, origin, nature, and immortality of the soul, by following closely these regulations. So it begins by doing what? By befriending Aristotle. This is very important. Namely, bringing Aristotle on the side of those that thought that the human soul, the rational soul, is immortal. It begins by by expounding, by taking on the most famous definitions of Aristotle of the soul as forma corporis. What does it mean that the soul is the form of the body? That the soul is what structures the body, but that is also a substantial form. Namely, it is not possible to separate the body, the human body, from this principle of life, which is what we call soul, right? And he goes on by unpacking, by commenting precisely and correctly on Aristotle's text. His point is that of claiming that also the rational soul, which is not material, which is separable from the body, can be called a form of the body. And he does that through these four arguments, which I don't think it's necessary I read, nor I go through them now. Then, after having talked about Aristotle's famous definitions, he also wants to defend that also according to philosophy, which sounds strange because Aristotle is usually the same with philosophy. He used to be identified with philosophy in that time. He also wants to prove that also according to philosophy, the soul is forma corporis. And he says, this is understandable because this is clear, this is evident because our soul is the first principle through which we think, therefore it is the form of the body and a substance. And therefore it is what we can call substantial form. Something that cannot be parted from, that makes a unicum with the body, something that structures it. So far so good. This is orthodox and I would say not particularly shocking, nor different from what Aquinas was saying. Now, I forgot to say something as well. Usually, what was also part of the agenda of a Jesuit teacher? Everybody maybe recalls that Saint Ignace, the founder of the Society of Jesus, only gave these prescriptions to his brothers, namely, in philosophy you will follow Aristotle, and in theology Thomas Aquinas. This doesn't make of Jesuits like Maldonado anything orthodox, nor as an Aristotelian or as a Thomist. They are never good Thomists, usually. It's quite the opposite, as I will show you. After philosophy, Maldonado wants to prove that also according to faith, the soul is the form of the body. And here we find a reference to this papal bull I already mentioned, the De Apostolici Regiminis, in Concilio Lateranense sezione sexta. This is exactly the textual reference to this papal bull. It was confirmed also by this council and also by the in Concilio Biennense, so in the 14th century, at the beginning of the 14th century, that the human soul is the form of the body. So, if we had to make a short sum up, we have found thus far nothing particularly strange. The soul is defined by Maldonado in Aristotelian terms. This definition is verified through what was established by faith and by philosophy, because the aim is keeping faith and reason hand in hand together. The soul, what is the soul? The first principle, perfection, and substance, insofar as it is separable from the body. There is thus far no mention of Aquinas, because Maldonado, when he mentions Aquinas, does it only to reject him. And this happens in two particular cases. Actually, there is also another case, but I don't have the time now to study today. I'm just going to present you these 2 points. Namely, how the soul enters the body, so how this junction between this principle of life and what we call the human body, how this happens, and the kind of substantial forms that make up a human being. I can already anticipate what the problem is. It seems, if we read Maldonado's text, that there are more forms, not just one form to structure the body. So, should we talk about animae, plural, formae corporis or anima singular. This was, I recall, exactly the orthodox position, the one defended by Aquinas, the one that was reinforced in all the councils, Vienna and in the Clementina and in the Lateranense, all these places that Maldonado has just mentioned. Nevertheless, he seems not to be very happy with Aquinas. There is at least another forma corporis, according to Maldonado. This is a precise reference to Thomas Aquinas, Divus Thomas, Libro Secundo Contra Gentes, blah blah blah, et prima parte, quia putavit accidentia non esse in sola materia sed in composito, dicit animum iungi cum corpore nullis dispositionibus medis. Okay, this is Latin, just a second, I will translate. What does this mean? What does Maldonado has in mind? He says that this is what everybody says, that the soul enters the body directly. It is immediately linked to the body by forming, once it is attached to it, once it enters the body, something unique with it. And without any intermediary tools, any dispositionibus medis, says. This is what everybody teaches. This is what Thomas Aquinas teaches. But Maldonado doesn't agree. He says this is false, that the accidents are not only in matter. What is the point? This example, this case Maldonado is making, is actually an echo of the debates of the first objectors of such a view. There is an echo of 13th century and 14th century debates around the number of the forms that make up a human being, in fact. Says Maldonado that, for instance, it is not true that the soul enters the body immediately, because if we take a look at a corpse, someone just passed away, someone who just died, we see that still in that very corpse it is visible certain features which we call accidents, such as a scar or a color. They are still there, the same features that we have spotted a few minutes ago when this very same person was alive. Basically, Maldonado is reproaching Aquinas for one precise point, namely, if it is true that the soul enters the body and in that very moment, without any intermediary disposition, we have a human being, if this is true, when we die, we should immediately have the body should immediately go back to nothing, because it would lose what structures it. This is how Maldonado reads Aquinas. Now, without discussing as to whether this is true or not, but this is Maldonado's reading. He's basically reading Aquinas in this way, as if the human being was a sort of golem. I'm sure that all of you know the golem story. Before and after that, the rabbi has done this sign on the matter. The soul enters the body, so we have a body, but without the soul, namely after death, there is no such thing as a human body. There is just unorganized matter. This very example of the corpse, as I already said, was made up already in the 13th century basically by all the Franciscans. We find this in Occam, but also before in Richard of Mediavilla as well. We find it in Scotus, we find it everywhere. And so, if this is true, there is at least another form organizing the 5 minutes, oh my God, organizing the body. And this is what Franciscans were calling the forma corporitatis. Also, according to Maldonado, there are more forms. We can divide the human souls into many forms because he thinks about them as forces, as vital forces. Against Aquinas. Says Aquinas is wrong when he claims that all the other faculties of the souls, the capacity of having sense perception, the capacity of nourishment, and the rational one. According to Aquinas, the rational soul is the human soul and encompasses somehow in a all these other potentialities, these other faculties of the soul. Says Maldonado, this cannot be true. This cannot be true because these other faculties of the souls are vital forces. So they depend, they have something else. They cannot be contained within the rational soul, but we must think about them as something distinguished, insofar as from them spring vital actions. So I don't have much time. So the expression in Aquinas is they have contained virtute, importancy within the rational soul, and to this virtute Maldonado opposes proprie et formaliter. They have something distinguished. So the temptation to read Maldonado as someone who is defending a plurality of forms within the human soul is very strong. It's very strong. Not even God could replace, says Maldonado, a vital force within the soul, because each of these faculties is something proprie et formaliter. The example of God as unable to replace a faculty of the soul will be actually made by every Jesuit after Maldonado. That is why at the beginning I was saying this reading of the anima will be very much influential. Now, going to the end, let us make some conclusion. Of course, there would be so much to say, but Maldonado never says that there are more forms within the soul. He defends that the soul is the unique form of the body, that the human soul is immortal, and so far so good. This is the orthodox view. For at least one of its power, the mind, the intellect, can perform an activity independently from the body. Nevertheless, we meet a lot, we encounter more forms within the composite, within the human composite. Now, the question is, why he does that? Why he does that? Why is he interested, even if we put into brackets the question as to whether Maldonado is interested in defending a plurality of forms within the human composite? The very question that I was asking myself as I was reading this text the first time was, why is he doing this precisely? And I would say that his aim is that of separating as much as he can, as much as possible, the rational part of the human being, our intellect, from the rest. He wants to be, in Italy, we say, in Italian there is this proverb, he wants to be more royal than the king, more king than the king. So he wants to be even better than Aquinas, and therefore he wants to separate in the clearest way the intellective soul from the rest of the faculty of the soul, because some of the faculties of the soul, as you know, they make usage of the body to perform an activity. Just think about sight, or about breathing. All these are activities that are embodied. But if there is such a thing as the human soul and some activities that are distinguished insofar as they stem from distinguished forms, things are, it becomes more easy, it becomes easier somehow to defend the soul's immortality from a merely philosophical point of view. I think that this was the reason of Maldonado to go against Aquinas. Of course, there would be so much to say about this, but I would rather leave some room for questions, if there is room. Thank you very much for your attention.
Děkujeme paní doktorce Aně Tropia za její prezentaci. Dávám prostor k diskuzi. Otázky v angličtině i v češtině můžou být eventuálně.
A češtině je fajn, ale prosím pomalu.
Dobře. Tak nevím, kdo z vás se hlásil první.
So I will formulate my question in English. Thank you very much, Anna, for your paper. It is really interesting. I was comparing it with Suarez's theory. He has emphasis on unicity on single substantial form. Here we have at least 4, corporeal form plus those 3. well known. And of course, the question is, if they are real distinct, and I understand that they are real distinct, not only formally in a scholastic way, but strongly as three or four distinct things, then God can preserve one without another, the second without the first, and do, these very strange things, So does Maldonado react, to this argument? Because this is the first argument mentioned by Suarez in his defense of the unicity of the soul. And by the way, this unicity was also part of, so to say, Toledo's Vade Mecum as the dogma. Even in Jesuits order, there's a single soul, not more. And that case with the passing away with the dead was, so to say, taken care of by this special understanding of matter, which is reified and in which inheres those accidents which were the part of the living man, living body, and even after that. So there is, I would say, more elegant, orthodox, solutions of this phenomenological case.
Thank you so much, Daniel. Yeah, I am aware of what Suarez does next. Maldonado never says that the human soul is composite. He always talks about one soul. There is also a nice text, in a nice paragraph from this text in which he says, how would these souls be together if we had more souls? So he wants to defend unicity as well. But he cannot really say anima formae corporis, because indeed there are more forms he's admitting. So I think that the solution is indeed looking at Suarez and what he does in is the anima, namely this conception of the soul, his conception of the soul with all these distinct powers, in fact, that are communicating through sympathy. But the soul is definitely, as Maldonado conceives of it, something different than what we find in Aquinas. We have this soul, which is like a sort of power station in which all the faculties are attached, and that directs its attention to the one or to the others. But what is the connection among the soul's faculties? This is the sympathy among them, insofar as they are rooted within the same soul. I feel that really Maldonado's aim is to emphasize the separability of the intellect in the strongest way, because he has more problems than Aquinas. All the objection that people made to Aquinas are precisely about the soul's immortality. I'm thinking about the Cayetan, I'm thinking about Pomponazzi as well. So all the battles happens in the paragraphs on the phantasm, the treatment of the phantasm. But Maldonado is trying to save the metaphysical part of the soul's constitution. Thank you.
So very quickly,
Yes.
I think in Suarez, I don't know how it's in Maldonado, this is two distinct things. First, these grades, these parts of the soul itself, so you have the sentient, vegetative, single rational soul, and these are contained, he says, also formally, not eminently, not virtually, but formally. He has the strong reasons for that. And the different thing is the powers and their relationships to the soul. And these are really distinct in Suarez, and the first one are only formally distinct, which is interesting, so he seems to accept not only these virtual distinctions, but also Scotistic formal distinctions. But this is the topic I will be published in Klaus Andersen's volume. I think there is formal distinctions in Suarez, but it is something different. So I would distinguish these two topics, and then it seems to me that Maldonado also accepts this formal distinction. So then it would be closer, and it would be less, heterodox in this sense.
Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you. My name is Matej. Maybe the question has been already answered, but I will ask anyway. So, if there are multiple forms, yet I am one unified substance, what is then the principle of the unicity of the substance? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yeah, well, unfortunately, this text by Maldonado is kind of short and arid because it's a compendium. And it's not particularly, it's very dialectical insofar as it is difficult. You can see the wit, the texture of the intellectual, but we don't find all the answers in this. It never talks about, it doesn't questions, it doesn't discuss, it doesn't doubt that there is only one soul. It says there is only one soul for each human being. And of course, public enemy number one is Averroes, so I mean, he really wants to defend this point. Nevertheless, he distinguishes these forms as operating within the body. He has a nice image at some point. He says that there are forms that have a sort of lab, a laboratory within our body, like sight in the eyes and so on and so forth. It's a very beautiful image. But I think that this point is really that of making, the point he wants to make is, but the mind is something completely different. It has no laboratory within the body. It is something else. So how do we reconnect things together? He doesn't have an answer for this. He doesn't have an answer. I gave myself an answer by looking at Suarez and by reading his most famous strategy of the collegantia virtutum, which he takes on for sure from Scaurus, from other 13th century thinkers. So there are echoes of this debate, right? I mean, all the soul's faculties are connected through the fact that they are rooted within the same soul, but they are distinguished. So the big absent here is the attention of the soul. How do we direct attention to the one thing or to the other? We have only one occurrence of attentio animi within this text, and it's basically about the abstraction, and it's almost incidental. So I don't know many things, but thank you.
Just a question.
Please.
How is this doctrine how is this doctrine connected to Bonaventures, or are there any other sources for this?
Sorry, how is this doctrine
connected to the doctrine of San Bonaventure?
The doctrine of San Bonaventure. Oh, which doctrine precisely? The collegantia virtutum, you mean?
The doctrine of plurality of forms.
Mm-hmm. Well, I don't know, honestly. Bonaventure is never mentioned by Maldonado. It's not a source. This text, I don't want to say that Maldonado did not know Bonaventure. I'm not saying this. But he quotes everybody, basically everybody from every tradition, from Renaissance philosophy, from the ancient times and the medieval ones. It doesn't mention only his contemporary, although of course you can understand some Pomponazzi here and there, some reference to the Paduan thinkers as well. Indeed, I mean, this text becomes more clear if we make a reference to the collegantia virtutum, to this connection among the soul's faculties, because then it becomes possible to reply to Matthias' question about the unity of the soul. I mean, how comes that we have not many things but only one? There is this unity which is given by the attention of the soul itself, I would say. Although Maldonado doesn't talk about this. It's a strange text, it's very difficult, but for sure, although he talks about anima forma corporis, this definition has lost, in my opinion, its original meaning. It's something different because the body has already a form of its own, the forma corporitatis that Franciscans were already talking about. Even if it's a less stable form. We cannot talk about two substances like Descartes will do, but we can talk about one substance and some other forms which inhere to this very substance. Thank you.